Hi everybody, welcome to our Reopening Schools Forum number 2. My name is Patrick McGrath. I'm the Superintendent of Schools here in the Burnt Hills Balsam Lake School District. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight. We changed the format a little bit from our last. I'm so used to being in these Google Meets, this feels a little different, but we have a limitation in the Google Meets that we can't change of 250, and last time we had literally had thousands of people who ended up watching the remote or the taped view of it, and so we didn't want so many people to be shut out. So this time we chose to go with YouTube Live. The good point is that we can get many people. It looks like we have a couple of hundred, looks like about 400 people watching right now. I'm sure that number will go up. This is all being recorded as well, so people can watch it in the future. So we are using the YouTube Live, so we don't have the ability to have that chat box rolling along, but we do have a link on our webpage where you can ask questions, and I have a number of folks here with me that we're all going to be working to answer your questions to the greatest extent possible, and we'll talk about how all those questions will be answered in the coming days as well. So if you go to the main webpage at bhbl.org, you'll see the very first story there. There's a link to this reopening forum, and in there's a link where you can enter your question. We're going to get those questions live right here, and we'll have a conversation, and we'll be looking over all those questions and trying to do our best to answer them. So again, I feel like I've gotten to know a lot of you. My email box has been extremely full over the last week or two since the last forum. Appreciate all the feedback, appreciate all the support, but also recognize that there's a lot of concerns, a lot of angst out there about what the reopening of school will look like. We hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll have a decent idea of where we're going with our reopening plan here in Burnt Hills, Balsam Lake, and we'll be able to move forward through the month of August and get ready to get back to school. So before we get into the presentation, I'd like to introduce the folks who are here with me. All the way over here to my right, Mr. Mike Nixon. Mike is the Director of Human Resources for the district, and he has taken on the charge of being the expert on all the state regulations and the New York State Department of Education guidelines and rules and regulations for opening school. So Mike's the kind of the go-to person for us when we have questions about the rules and about the law. And then right here to my right is Mr. Dave Collins. Dave's the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, and he is active in coordinating with the building principals and the building councils on designing the instructional program for the new year. And our other Assistant Superintendent over here to my left, Dr. Chris Abdu. Chris is in charge of all of our support services, and he oversees transportation and food services, all of our custodial and maintenance services, and he's here to answer questions in all of those areas as well. And then sitting to Chris's left is our Board of Education President, Mr. Don Marshall, who has a few opening comments that he'd like to make.
Thank you, Dr. McGrath. On behalf of the Board of Education, I just want to assure the committee that we have been involved and engaged in this process from the beginning. And so we know how important it is, and we know how complex it is. We also know that we represent you, the community. We are also members of the community, and we have our children and, in my case, grandchildren in our schools. So we know that we have to get this right. And we have a lot of smart people working really hard to get this right. So we welcome your thoughts and your questions, and again, thank you for participating in this process.
And then if you could just keep on going there, over to Mr. Marshall's left is Tara Mitchell. A lot of people have communicated with Tara Mitchell. She is our communication specialist. She does everything on our webpage, all the information that you've seen, and everything that communicates from the district out is somehow in one way, shape, or form going through Tara's office, and appreciate her support and all the work that this reopening plan has brought into her office as well. So let's bring the slides up here, and we'll start to work our way through some of the information. I guess I want to just start by saying that this is a massive undertaking, as I'm sure, and I know people are aware because I read it in the email that gets sent all the time. It's a massive undertaking to try. We got all the introductions, all the team here. Let me go back to what's the most important thing. If I'm saying it twice, then it's worth repeating. This is a massive undertaking to reorganize and change everything that this district is and represents in a matter of a few short weeks, and we take it extremely seriously. And we are, as much as we'd like to answer every question that everyone has, it wouldn't be wise or prudent for us to do that. We don't want to make a decision until we come to the point where we have all the information at each step of the way. So we will be answering some questions with the idea that that's a next level decision. It's not a decision that needs to be made to structure and move forward with our reopening plan at this time. It's a next level decision, and we want to make sure we have all the information necessary before we make that next level decision. So just want to start with that. And if we could go into the slides, and we'll talk about the way that this will work here is I'll talk about the overall instructional models, the way that we're going to structure school, and then we'll talk about the timeline for when we're going to make those decisions and when you need to make the decisions for your child. And then we'll take a lot of questions and answers. We've already received over 100 questions that have come in on the form, and we'll work our way through those things. This plan continues to move through multiple stakeholder groups. We had a large reopening committee that met throughout the month of June. That committee gathered lots of scenarios and brainstorming ideas. Then our building councils, which are governing groups that oversee the academics in each of our buildings, have been working with these reopening plans over the last couple of weeks, giving us feedback and helping our principals to design the multiple plans that we're going to talk about. So, and then we received we had a survey that went out to all of you, and that survey was the first in my career. I don't ever know of a survey that had 100% participation, and we literally had slightly more responses than we have number of kids in the district. Some people might have answered it twice, some people, mom and dad, both got an email or something, but in any case, we got a very, very good picture of where our community is, and that helped us a lot with designing these plans. So we're in a situation where we have been able to develop a number of models, and the governor next week will be making a final decision on whether or not schools will reopen. He uses the rolling averages of percent of infections from COVID, and if he makes that decision, which all indications are that he will make a decision for the capital region to move forward with reopening, we are expected to have a plan for in-person return to school following all the New York State Department of Health guidelines and the New York State Education Department's guidelines. That needs to be submitted by July 31st, and that would then be published on our website once it's approved by the State Education Department. So that's our timeline. It's, as I said, very, very complex undertaking. We're staying focused on the big picture at this time, and we're continuing to work out the myriad of details as we make the bigger picture decisions. We feel that this overall framework provides us with a master plan, something that that our community, our staff, and most of all our students will be best served by. And so we feel comfortable that we're staying very close to the guidance from both State Ed and Department of Health. And as I said, received a great deal of stakeholder input in order to put this together. So we are at a good point, at a good place. And if we, amongst that stakeholder input is the input that you all gave us in filling out the survey, and we took the opportunity to ask you, if you could pick an option, would you be choosing for a fully remote option or for an in-person option in September? And these results, from the time that they were coming in, around 400, 500, 600 responses, all the way up to over 3,000 responses, were very consistent. It was right around 27, 28%, 29% for a virtual school, and then 70% for an in-person option. So, you know, that we felt the community was very clear on that, and so we based all of our planning around those results and the comments that were in that survey, as well as the answers to the other questions in the survey, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So we have elected to move forward with a plan that offers the community two options, a virtual option and an in-person option. We have been working very hard to reorganize our entire district in order to accommodate both a high-quality virtual option and a high-quality in-person option. So I want to talk first about the virtual option. Lots of questions have come in about this already. So the students would enroll in the virtual option, and they receive full instruction in all core required classes covering the same material that would be covered in person. And we would be asking for a commitment to enrollment in the virtual in the virtual school, and that would be a commitment of elementary parents for the first trimester, essentially through the end of November, and middle and high school parents would be committing to the first semester, so that would be through the end of January. So we'd be asking parents to commit to that mode in order to help us with the incredible complexity of scheduling this. Now, the remote instruction would support all Board of Regents requirements for quality and duration of instruction, and it would address all of the requirements for daily attendance. There's a lot of questions about what would virtual look like. We learned a lot from the spring remote learning, and we had our teachers submitted some amazing reflections that they had done very shortly after the remote period ended to say, if we were to start this, if we were to do this intentionally, if we were to organize this on purpose, how would we do it? And we really appreciate the feedback that we received, the in-depth reflections on remote learning, and we believe that that insight will lead us to be more effective in the virtual space. We also are glad that we have the opportunity to get a lot of professional development, both in the technology and in the pedagogy for teaching virtually, because teaching virtually is different than teaching in person. It's a different style, it involves different skill sets, it involves different tools, and now we're prepared for it versus reacting to it back in March and April. And another thing that I think is important to the success of the virtual model is that if parents are electing it or selecting it or choosing to be there, then we have already a desire to have it be a successful mode, and we would have teachers who would be willing to teach in that mode, and also we have kind of the recipe for success for that virtual model. So we are confident in saying that we're going to be putting together a virtual school that will offer a high quality experience for our students who enroll in it. The schedule and structure of that virtual experience will be designed by each level, so it will look a little different at elementary school, middle school, and high school. But there are a couple of things that the design will take into account. Number one, there will be an interface with the in-person schooling as needed. So there will be opportunities, say for example in the elementary, for the specials to actually interact with the virtual students. So the specials will be on a schedule, and the students will tune into their special area teachers and their special area classes on a regular schedule. The students in the virtual school and the in-person school would be progressing at a similar pace, so that it would make it easier for them to join back together seamlessly at a point in the future. So that's an important point, that the in-person school, as you're going to see in a few minutes, is going to have its own set of challenges which could potentially hamper or make a set of difficulties in moving forward the way we normally would, and the virtual school will too. But both of them will be moving forward with the goal of providing a full year of instruction over the course, that we won't miss a beat, and that we will be able to provide all of the core experiences and instruction that we're required to provide and that we want to provide. Students in the virtual school will also need to follow New York State Ed requirements that assures daily attendance. So there will be a mechanism by which we know that our kids are connected in with us on a daily basis based upon the requirements from New York State Ed for any virtual learning that needs to be there. So that needs to be a part of it. So we would ask that parents would remain in that virtual mode for the specified period of time, and this is important. We recognize that times change and the circumstances change, and we don't know what next month will bring, let alone 3 months from now in November or in January. And so we recognize that people may want to change that mode at that specified time. And I think we need to speak to the whole district to say that depending on those numbers and the Department of Health guidelines, a transfer of students back into the in-person could affect the overall schedule that I'm going to describe that we're going to be working on for hybrid. So we have to go into this recognizing that we're not making a plan for a year. We're thinking about the whole year. We're thinking about the semester. Right now we're making a plan for the fall, for the first trimester in elementary, and then for the first semester in secondary. So this is going to have to be something that we stay close together with, where the parents are very tuned into what the district is planning, and depending on the numbers of students, if they do come back from remote, it could affect our in-person schedule, and I want to make sure that that's clear. Because we're not only guided by what our parents want for where students are, but we're guided by the Department of Health guidelines, which we don't have any control over, and if they don't change and we have more students, that's going to change our ability to provide the in-person instruction in the way that we're planning to do it in September. Hope that makes sense, and we can talk more about that at the end, or questions and answers. So Also want to mention that all of the requirements of IEPs for students who are enrolled in the virtual school will be met. And so those things will be worked out once we know who the students in the virtual school are. The elementary virtual school will be staffed by faculty of BHBL elementary schools, and so they will enroll in this virtual school for the trimester, and the students from the schools will mix together in classes in order to do this efficiently and effectively. It may be that students from the 5th grade at Stevens are in the same class as students from the 5th grade at Charlton Heights and Pashley. They're in that school, and for this semester, that elementary virtual school, we will be posting for a temporary position of a principal of the virtual school. So it will be given the same attention and oversight and help and support that our brick and mortar schools have. And when the crisis is over and the students do return from the virtual, they will return to their home schools. So they have their home schools, but when they're in the virtual school for elementary, they will be in a virtual school that mixes with all 3 of our schools. So we mentioned the virtual school principal. Looking at the parent responses by building and grade level, we realized that it's probably going to be somewhere between 13 and 15 total sections in our virtual elementary school, and it may be necessary to have some multi-grade sections, like maybe a 2-3 or maybe a 4-5. We found that in brick and mortar that to be very successful in a couple of cases, so it's certainly a model that we could use, and it might be helpful in organizing our sections. So put that out there that we may have some multi-grade, no more than two grade levels, contiguous grade levels, but that may be something that we look at in the virtual world. And we also, as with this entire plan, there are costs associated with this, and it may require us to reallocate funds for other things to add an additional elementary section or 2 to make the numbers work out. And so there's a number of things that this pandemic has put on us that will increase costs. We're keeping close track of those things in case there's an opportunity for the district to receive reimbursement for those additional costs down the road. But right now, we're in a situation where we have to make decisions to make sure that we are able to provide for our students, and there are going to be some costs involved in that. The middle school and high school virtual structure, again, we say that the virtual schools are designed at the building level by our building councils, and the exact structure of the middle school and high school level virtual options are still under consideration. They're more complex in the sense that teachers who teach those students need to be certified in the areas that they teach in, where elementary teachers are certified to teach all subject areas to elementary. So there's, based on numbers and things, that will affect the design of the virtual school, but the main attributes of the virtual school will stay the same, that it'll be a high quality experience. We will have Burnt Hills Boston Lake teachers. We will be doing our best to match up important electives for students. There will be some difficulties with some electives in the virtual world, but there'll be other situations, or certainly things that are needed for diploma, for graduation, will be provided. And again, we're looking at a couple of different options that we're excited about, that the high school is working through and the middle school are working through to design that virtual experience. But again, you can expect that will be similar to the attributes I described for the elementary virtual school. So now let's move on to option 2, the in-person instruction. This option would involve in-person instruction in strict adherence to the governor and New York State Department of Health guidelines. And the New York State Education Department's guidelines. So we have 3 things that we'd like to talk about, and we'll get into it a little more in the questions and answers, where you can look at the governor's guidelines for return when it comes to safety, and those safety things involve for students. Now, these are the 70% of our students or so that will be enrolled in the in-person option. Screening prior to entry, a strict screening protocol in place where you will testify by an app, a text message that you'll get, that your student does not have the symptoms, all the same questions that all of us who come to work every day are used to answering by now. And we would be asking that parents take their students' temperature in the morning, and that become a regular practice. We'll talk about thermometers and that sort of thing, and we're looking at hoping that people can plan to get a hold of that. If they don't have a thermometer in the house, to have that. That should be a regular thing, to take temperatures in the morning before school, and then it will ask if the temperature is below a specified amount. You'll say yes, it was below, and then you'll send that in, and we'll have lists of those things, and it's going to be required that we have that certification every day whether you drop off or whether you ride the bus. We're going to be using an app that will help us to make that a simple thing. It shouldn't be too cumbersome. It can be done through text message, through a smartphone, or through your email on your computer, and so we'll have more details on that as we go. We'll also be doing some infrared temperature scans on the way in for students maybe who aren't certified, or just if we have the capacity to do it, we'll be screening all students as they come through for temperature. We also are looking at some technology that looks at some thermal skin temperature, that just as you walk by, it just senses if somebody has a high skin temperature, and would allow the nurse there to take their temperature with an infrared thermometer. So very important that we have strict guidelines from the Department of Health of how we handle a student who does have symptoms, or potentially a student whose parent calls and says that they tested positive. Then there's a strict set of guidelines that come in. We bring the Department of Health in, and contact tracing is underway, and we would follow their guidance in those cases. The second attribute or aspect of safety with the returning in person is social distancing and masks. We all know that by now. We live in a world where if we are in close proximity to other people, we wear a mask. We try to maintain that 6-foot distance, and so there certainly will be that exact atmosphere in school if you're here in person. Masks will be required essentially throughout the day at all times, according to the Department of Health regulations, except for two times. One is when students are eating, obviously, and that will be in socially distant settings, and we're working on setting up our cafeterias or our lunch spaces. In the case of elementary, they'll be eating in their classrooms, and those will be socially distant. So they will be allowed to remove their masks for that. As far as the other exception that they do allow for is for instruction. So when in socially distanced spaces. So, and we'll get into what that looks like in a minute. So there's a lot of questions about masks, and the most important thing is that we recognize that everyone's desire is to come to school and be safe and keep each other safe. We will be watching the guidance, because the Department of Health does say that there's, in a time when if an infection rate ticks up, then they would highly recommend that students wear masks all the time, including during instruction. So we'll be watching that and watching further guidance from the state on masks. But certainly one of the messages you should start to get is that in person will look different. As much as we know that our teachers will be greeting our kids, excited to see them, and we want this to be a positive experience. When you're getting screened for your temperature coming in the door, and you're walking with masks in the hallway, with your friends, it's going to be a different atmosphere. Elementary, middle, and high school, there's no question about it. We want to make sure that people understand that we're going to be following these guidelines carefully, and we have to do that to keep everybody safe. Social distancing will be practiced quite extensively, and I'll talk about that as we get into the models in a second. And then finally, rigorous cleaning and disinfecting procedures. Our maintenance and custodial teams are working on ordering and bringing in some of the newest and best disinfectants and virucides that they can get their hands on. They were out in front of it, ordering large supplies of it so that we wouldn't run into supply problems. So I commend them for that, and we're confident that we will have the staffing and the opportunity to make sure we keep things very clean and disinfect to even a higher extent than ever. So in that in-person instruction, a rule of thumb is that we really be committing to groups of about 12 students. Some spaces might be a little bit bigger and it could get up to 14, but we're really using that 12 as our rule of thumb. So we won't have students in classroom spaces in more than 12 students. We're even removing the desks from the spaces so that there's no extra desks. There's only the number of seats that match the number of students that can be properly socially distanced in that space. So this can be, there's two different ways you can get to 12 students per space. You could do in-person instruction every day, but do it in more spaces and smaller spaces, or you could, or smaller groups, I should say, or you could do a hybrid model where you bring in small groups one day and they are learning remotely on a different day. So you could either bring in all your students and split them into smaller groups, or you could bring in half your students and have the other half join remotely. And both of those models are going to be utilized at different levels. So we'll start talking about elementary grades 1 through 5. because now this is not finalized, but we feel confident that we can go forward with a plan to do this, and confident that we can provide fully in-person options for grades 1 through 5. So grades 1 through 5 would come to school every day. If they're in the in-person mode, they would come to school every day in person. And we are still working through those details, but what this will look like is we will take the grade levels and we will divide them into each section. Student section will be divided into essentially 2 pods. We're calling them pods as a working term. So the pods would the teacher of that section would be paired with either another teacher or a teaching assistant, and they would teach that group in person, and then they would have work for them to do with their teacher assistant, and then the teacher would switch back and forth between their sections. So one teacher would have 2 pods, which would normally be the size of a regular class, but instead they're working in 2 spaces, socially distant. And so those home spaces would be places where the students' stuff would be, also would be where they would eat their lunch, and they would have their classes there. Some of the special areas may come in by broadcast. Other special areas may come in person. They'll go to gym class. They will have PE. They'll have recess. But when they're in the classroom, it'll be different. I mean, there's no question that it'll be different, especially at the younger grade levels where they might have carpets normally and rugs that they sit on. Like those aren't things that we're allowed to have under the guidance if we're going to do in person. So those will be, it will be different. So when we talk about kindergarten in a second, the kindergarten experience, for now won't be what we are all used to it being. Which is part of the thinking that goes into how we're going to be proposing to look at kindergarten. But even our littlest kids in first and second grade, that's going to be a little bit of a different setting for them. But our principals are working hard, and I know our staff will work hard to make it as comfortable for the kids as possible, and as warm and as embracing as possible. But it's going to be tough in following these guidelines, and we want to be clear that the rules that are in these documents from the Department of Health and the Department of Education, a couple of 100 pages of rules and regulations on how to do this, are a challenge. This is our kindergarten thoughts here. So at first we had put out the idea of potentially just delaying the start of kindergarten until January, and in some conversations we said maybe to the end of the first trimester, and just because of the strange and different types of environment that we're going to be pushed into by these guidelines. Clearly, if you look at the graph there, that wasn't the most well received by our kindergarten parents. Hopefully, many of whom are on this call or will be following this. Although about a quarter, and it really split. Very similar to the other about the 70-30. The blue 22.5 is those parents who support the idea of delaying. We looked hard at this, and we looked at a lot of different options for kindergarten. See, the problem is that our buildings are completely maxed out grades 1 through 5 if we're going to split all the 1 through 5s into 2 sections. Because if you think about, we have to have quality spaces for not just the number of sections we have in a building, but twice that number. Now, it does get helped out by the fact that some students will be in the virtual school. That certainly helps. But even with that 30%, to take the number of sections that remain in elementary school and then double them is extremely taxing on the size of the building. And we will be having, in most cases, pod classrooms where your main classroom is in a secondary location. Some will be in cafeterias, some will be in art rooms, some will be in music rooms. So in order to do that, we're maximizing how much space we can possibly have. So one possibility to have kindergarten full-time as well would be to move away from that daily schedule, to have all grades or some of the other grades besides just kindergarten not come every day. We talked about that and looked at that, but we felt that was an option we wanted to make as a last resort. We talked about identifying an alternate location for a kindergarten center, possibly in another district building or a community building. We talked about delaying, as we said, the beginning of kindergarten maybe until December 1st or so. Even was suggested to hold kindergarten in the afternoon, a second session after the elementary building, to have some more sessions in the afternoon. And then we talked about potentially just a purely virtual kindergarten, which seems odd to think about the experiences of kindergarten and then having that be try to duplicate that on a computer screen. But the plan as it stands right now is hopefully something that is not what we hoped it would be is a full day every day, but looking at bringing in 2 sections of kindergarten in each building a day, every other day. So you would come in on, for example, a kindergarten section would come in on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then the other would come in Tuesday, Thursday. Then the next week, Monday, Wednesday, and the other group is Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So essentially it's Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. That would be for a full day kindergarten, the full day kindergarten experience. We do feel that would allow us to go through, in a worst case scenario, if things don't go back to normal in any way by the end of this year, in a worst case scenario, we still would have them for a half a year, which is essentially the same as a half day kindergarten program, which many of our other schools around do that successfully, prepare students for first grade with that half year program. Not ideal, and we would certainly be looking for an option to return to a full day as soon as possible. Another option that we're looking at is moving. We would have to move some of the 5th grades out of the elementary schools that don't have the room. I mean, that's what the reality is that we don't have a way to socially distance only up to a certain point. We think we could fit 2, but not 4 sections of kindergarten. Because remember, 4 sections of kindergarten now requires 8 spaces to do. So we do believe we could get all of our kindergarten kids in every other day in their home building, keeping 1 through 5 in their home building. We are looking at some of the other possibilities, but those options have many questions and logistical problems, not to mention our 5th graders moving out of their building that they've been in and this being their last year in that building. But it's under consideration, and we're looking, and we plan to make some decisions on this in the next couple of days, and we will be very transparent and we'll get that information out to kindergarten parents. But right now, I think it's very likely that kindergarten parents should plan on an every other day option to start the year. And again, we'll continue to try to make that full day as soon as possible through a number of different possibilities that we continue to explore. The in-person for the middle school and high school. So whereas again we have an issue with kindergarten or with elementary versus secondary certification for teachers, the way that the numbers have projected out, we're going to be forced into a hybrid in-person model. So unlike elementary, who will come in person every day, the high school and middle school students will come in person. If they're in-person students, they will come to school the equivalent of every other day. Okay, so on the other day the students will be in remotely with their classes and learning with their classes in a remote way, and we'll talk about what that might look like in a couple minutes. So the element or the middle and the high school will be, and you'll see this is a very common solution that across the region schools have been forced to move into, where you bring half of your middle school and high school students in on one day, and you bring the other half in on another day. And so in that hybrid model, there's a couple things I wanted to make sure parents knew and kept in mind as they were planning for how to approach this year and how to deal with these changes. We tried a model where students from the same family would be able to attend school on the same day. And I know I emailed back to some people who asked me about this, and I said, we're really working hard to try this. There's a huge problem with doing that, in that the high school runs on a 6-day rotation, and the middle school runs on a 5-day rotation. And so it would either require one of them to change completely the way they schedule their classes and all of the whole structure of the school to match the other in order for those students who absolutely need to be on the same day to make that happen. So the principals, Mrs. Wolf and Mr. Brunson, have talked about this, and what they came up with is, rather than change the whole structure of the way the schools are designed, which in a time when we're trying to keep some things as much as normal as possible, they would rather work with families that were really in a situation where they needed that middle and high school student to be on the same day, and they think that they could do some things with either probably the high school student schedule to help make that happen. So we're going to try to look at this on a case-by-case basis, where this really is an issue where a family needs to be on that same schedule. again, to the greatest extent possible, students will be receiving high quality instruction every day, whether they're home or whether they're in school. There's a number of ways that we're looking. We do have the obligation for in-person or for daily attendance for students who are learning remotely. That's an obligation by state education department. So whether it means that students are tuned into a live stream of the class that the next day they'll attend, they're half the days they're out, half the days they're in, but they're always in that class. There's a couple other models that teachers may use. One is called the flipped classroom, is a way that could be an interesting way to where the student has the lecture portion on video with questions embedded where the teacher knows that they're able to answer those questions or teacher knows that they've watched the lecture, and then the next day when they're in class with the teacher that they would have opportunity to discuss and do activities based upon the lecture that they saw. It's called the flipped classroom model. We have teachers who use it very successfully already, even in traditional learning, and so something that could be used. So my point is that students would be receiving, our goal is 180 days of high quality instruction, whether half of those days are taken remotely or half of those days are here, and all the things that I said earlier applying to the virtual school apply here as well. Now, another thing to mention is that because of the way the schedules are set up, if you did a weekly schedule that was exactly the same every week, the students would wind up in situations where they would be taking the same classes virtually always, and the same classes, because most students don't take the same classes every single day in middle and high school. And the teams in the middle school all are a little bit different. The high school is completely the same every other day. So if you were remote every other day, and if you were absent from school and remote every other day, you would end up in a situation where always the days you were out, you would have one set of classes, and always the days you were in, you would have another. So I won't get into too much of the detail of it right now, because I know that the high school and middle school both are still working these things out. But the important thing is to note that the weeks won't look the same. So as far as work goes for families, it's not like they can say, my kids will be in school on Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. It might look like Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday one week, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Friday the next week. So it'll be sent out and it'll be set, but it won't look the same. And I know that that's a problem for some people looking to try to get a set schedule every week, but it's one of those things that we really gave a lot of thought to and having a lot of difficulty working out. So again, extremely complex. The whole thing is complex, and every decision that you make moves 15 other things, and so that's been a real challenge. And again, I'll put that warning at the end here. Any significant changes to the number of students enrolled in the virtual option at the end of the first time frame could affect the way we schedule the in-person. So the hazard of allowing this virtual school and in-person school, which we fully support, but the one dangerous spot of that is what happens when people switch. It's going to make us potentially have to switch everything back. So just want to put that out there as a warning as we finish up here. So the last thing just mention is that for the in-person, we're really working hard to retrofit our facilities. This has been underway since the beginning of July, looking at ways to help our facilities to adhere to the DOH guidelines. It's going to be expensive, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of rearranging, identifying structural PPE, shields and guards that would be necessary, just like the grocery store you go into or your doctor's office. You see these things everywhere. We're really required to do the same thing across our whole district to get school open. Purchase of masks, gloves, shields, and other materials as necessary PPE has already begun. We have boxes and boxes of gloves and masks and shields and thermometers. The purchase of cleaning supplies and technology is well underway, as I said earlier, and the software and technology to complete our screening process is already done. So there's a lot going on. I talked for a while here, 40 minutes, but I hope I gave an outline of where we are right now. The next level of details are already being discussed and underway, but we feel that we can move. We do feel confident coming forward to you and saying we can move forward with this plan. And we'd like to start by taking some of the questions, and maybe we'll start over here with Mike and just kind of take a look through the questions that are being submitted, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. McGrath. So one of the big concerns that came through with respect to the questions was the worst case scenario for a lot of us when we look at the reopening, which is what do we do if there's a positive test amongst a staff person or a student here at Burnt Hills. So the guidance that we've been given from the State Education Department is very clear. And so if there is a positive test by one of our students or staff members, we are obligated to immediately report that to the local county health departments. We happen to be a district that has 2 county health departments. We have some buildings that are in Saratoga County, some buildings that are in Schenectady County, and so we would report to both of those county health departments. And then we're also obligated to talk or to provide them with information so that they can make assessments on contact tracing. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about our screening mechanisms that we're going to use so that we can have really high quality contact tracing data and symptom checking for our students and staff. But once we provide that information to the county health departments, at that point, the county health departments will really go ahead and decide who needs to be quarantined. Is it just the people that have been directly exposed in a classroom, let's say, or on a bus? Do the family members need to be quarantined? So all of those kind of quarantine decisions will be made by the local health experts at the county level. And again, our responsibility is that we'll work with both the Schenectady County Health Departments and the Saratoga County Health Departments. This guidance also spells out exactly what the requirements are if somebody should test positive for COVID-19, how they would actually reintegrate themselves back into the school environment. So there are 3 criteria that any person who would happen to test positive for COVID-19 would have to meet before we could allow them back into the school environment. So they would have to be out for a minimum of 10 days. They would have to be fever-free without the use of any type of fever-reducing medication for 3 days, and they'd have to see an improvement in the symptoms related to COVID-19, coughing, loss of taste for 3 days as well. So at a minimum, people will have to be out for 10 days if they happen to test positive for COVID-19, and then it could be longer if their symptoms don't clear up or if a fever doesn't clear up. Once those symptoms and the fever have cleared up, they still have to wait 3 additional days to return to the building. And obviously our school health officials, the school nurses, and our school physician would be in constant contact with those folks and require the appropriate medical documentation from a medical professional before we would allow anybody to come back into the school setting. So with respect to the positive test, which again I think all of us view as one of the most difficult scenarios to plan for, we will follow very strictly the guidance that's been put out by the State Education Department and the Department of Health. We'll provide the information to the 2 county health departments, provide them with the contact tracing information, and then rely on their guidance with respect to who should be quarantined in the classrooms or in the district, and then monitor people as they return back into the classroom from a quarantine or from a positive test. So hopefully that explains what our procedures are. It is one of those things that we take very seriously. The health of our students and our staff is going to be paramount when we're going through this whole process. And I think all of us that have been working on this want to make sure that we are doing everything possible to prepare for that hopefully unenviable situation where we get information that there has been a COVID positive test in our community. So,
good evening. A number of the questions related to my area have been covered in the overview by Dr. McGrath, but there's a few, particularly in the fully virtual domain that people asked. I'll take a couple and then we'll continue to move around. One question was, if I have children in multiple buildings, do I have to select the same option for all of my children, virtual or in person? And the answer to that is no. Ultimately, you'll be able to make selections for your individual child based on the format that you would determine is the best. Ultimately, you would have to adhere to that decision based on the parameters that Dr. McGrath mentioned earlier on. There's a lot of questions in here related to the specifics of the schedule and the instructional program, curriculum. So all of those things fall into the realm of what was mentioned before as kind of the next level pieces as we work those particulars out at each level. There's subtle differences in relationship to all of those three pieces, the curriculum, the instruction, and the schedule, in relationship to the elementary and the secondary, even differences between middle and high school. And also obviously between the virtual and the in-person learning opportunities. But in all of those areas, the consistency fact is that we're looking at 180 days of high quality instruction. So in a lot of the questions related to that, it reflects remote learning in comparison to last spring to virtual learning in the fall moving forward. And the district has been committed in working internally with groups. Again, we have a group of teacher leaders who work in the instructional area who have been committed to professional development, significant professional development opportunities for virtual online learning through the spring and into the fall, and they'll be working closely alongside of our professional development committee to ultimately develop opportunities for our faculty who are working both in the hybrid environment and the virtual environment to continue to hone skills to deliver instruction in each of those modalities. They're very different, and both of them are extremely different than what we typically do, so that professional development piece is going to be key. In all of those areas, further information and further documentation will come out to families as we develop in conjunction with our curriculum councils and our building councils and our building principals the specifics to schedule, curriculum, and pedagogy, and we'll continue to get information out on the guidelines for those things. But whether you're virtual or in person, while there'll be differences, the commonality again is daily attendance is an expectation, and ultimately there's an expectation of high quality instruction for the 180 days that we're required to provide that instruction. On the electives,
That slide's on, just on.
oh, sorry, I didn't bring my glasses.
So a lot. I'm sorry. This went up on the screen while you were talking. A lot of questions came in about the when did they let us know, and there was that. Might as well, in case people have to tune out while we're answering these questions, I wanted to get this question in there. We're looking at a relatively quick turnaround time, I know, but it's extremely important that we have a handle on these numbers so that we can plan effectively. So we're hoping to send out a commitment form or a registration e-form to parents by email by August 3rd. And then we ask to have those back by the 10th, and they're going to come back and they're going to go directly to your child's school, and so that they can begin to populate the different schools and begin to get numbers. So we'll remind everybody again, but that registration e-form will come back. And again, if I didn't mention for kindergarten as well, there is a virtual option for kindergarten as well. So if there's parents who would like to enroll in a virtual section of kindergarten and not come in person at all, given the restrictions and the things that we talked about earlier, you will also have that option on this form. So a couple things I wanted to make sure in case people had to tune out.
I can jump back to me. Chris, you want to jump in?
Sure. All right, good evening, everyone. A bunch of questions. I'm going to try to get through the first chunk of them. I'm sure you may have to come back to me shortly after that. One of the first questions that was asked had to do with middle school and high school classrooms having nut products in them during lunch if students were to eat in the classrooms. As of right now, there is not a plan for middle school and high school classrooms to eat, middle school classes to eat in their classrooms. We would still have socially distant experiences for those students in the high school and middle school cafeteria at this point. There were a few questions about the YMCA. Dr. McGrath and I had a great meeting with some officials from the YMCA in the recent past, and they are working with us to make sure we have the same before and after care programs with the YMCA at our 3 elementary facilities that we've had in the past. One thing to note is that the YMCA is going to be required to adhere to the same procedures and protocols that a school would in order to have those programs. So they are looking forward to working with us again this fall. They have not committed to doing it 100%, but they are definitely interested, and we're working with them to make our gymnasium spaces in all 3 elementary schools available for both before care and after care in the afternoon. Students may bring their lunches from home next year. That was a question. That is certainly allowed. They're also going to have the option to buy lunch from our cafeteria on a daily basis. Particularly at the elementary level, the lunches students may be able to buy will probably look different than they've been in previous years. It may potentially be similar to a brown bag lunch that students would more easily be able to take and eat in their classroom setting, so that's something that's still being determined. There were some questions about bathrooms and how those bathrooms would be clean, disinfected, and where they'd be safe. Some of the areas we're right now exploring with our bathrooms is it looks at this point, and again, I want to stress this is all still in development, but we're looking at only one student being allowed in the bathroom at any given time. We are exploring the possibility of purchasing seat covers for the bathrooms to give that extra degree of safety there. And we're now working on a schedule with our custodians and cleaners to have an hourly disinfecting schedule in each of the bathrooms. So every hour during the school day, those bathrooms will be fully disinfected on that basis. There was a question about track and tennis courts, whether or not they'd be used. We haven't made any decisions on that yet. That's a little further down the road for us. There's a question about looking to some of our local churches or getting modular space to get extra spaces for our classrooms, for our students' extra classroom spaces. One of the things that the State Education Department did not relax to any degree is the requirements for any space that a student occupies. So whether it be a modular space or lease space in another location, those locations would have to be fully up to code with all the New York State Education Department requirements, which means plans would have to be created for those spaces. Even if we're leasing them, we'd have to have our architects draw up plans of those spaces. Those plans would need to be submitted to the State Education Department. They would have to approve them, and if there's anything in any of those spaces that's not identical to the different rules and regulations we have to have in a school district, they would have to be installed or be done before any of our students could occupy those spaces. There's a cost consideration there. We've been advised by our architects that a single modular classroom is roughly $200,000. So that's something that's cost prohibitive in some ways. We're exploring that. But even more so, there's a time issue here. It's generally not possible to have something like that sent into SED, designed by our architects, sent into SED, have a bid process with all the different contractors that might want to bid on it, coordinate it using the Wicks law procedures that the state has established, and then having it ready for our students to occupy. It's likely not possible that can be done in a month. We'll continue to explore those options, but those are not optimistic about that at this time because of that. We have spoken to some of the local churches already. I believe one of them has said they're not able to work with us this fall, but we'll continue to look into that. I'll do two more before I move on, and then I'll get back to some of the other questions. Busing. The slides, there were no slides on busing with the survey responses in this presentation, but I can verbally speak to it. We really appreciate some of our parents stepping up to the plate with this because your responses are really going to help us plan transportation this fall. By the results of the survey, 60% of the parents that responded to that survey have indicated that they will be able to drive their students to school in the morning. 50% indicated that they would be able to drive their students home in the afternoon, which is really very important to us because what that allows us to do is for the people that still continue to ride the bus, it looks like if those percentages hold, and I believe as Dr. McGrath mentioned with the due date of August 10th for these registrations, if those numbers hold, we're pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to socially distance the remainder of our students that are on the school bus to the greatest extent possible. Students will be required to wear masks on the bus. But if you can imagine a large school bus, it's a 66 passenger bus, you would normally have 3 students per seat. There's 22 seats on that 66 passenger bus. Right now, students would be required to wear a mask on the entire bus ride, and we would also envision 1 student per seat. So in those 22 seats, you're going to have 1 student per seat, with the exception of siblings who may be required to sit together. If the numbers hold, we're looking at 60% of parents driving in the morning, 50% in the afternoon, we're pretty optimistic that we're going to be able to build in that socially distant protocols with our transportations in the morning, with our transportation system in the morning. So that's where we are with it right now, and because we've had so many parents step up to the plate and say they're going to be able to help us out this fall and do the transportation, right now any parent that just simply cannot do it and request transportation, that remaining 40% in the morning and 50% in the afternoon, we're looking to accommodate that. There's going to be no lottery for transportation. We believe we should be able to do that if those percentages hold. One other question related to getting to school in the morning. It looks like there was a question about people wanting to walk to school, and one of the things we are exploring is the potential of a walking school bus. Those that may not know what that is, it just may be a group of children led by an adult or 2 who might be in neighborhoods that are very close to some of our school buildings, would actually walk together to school as a group. And I think that would be something we'd like to see if we can we could put together. We're working on that now. But even so, the question was about keeping the sidewalks clear. We are going to contact the county and ask them to the greatest extent that they can to help us out, knowing the situation we're in, keeping those sidewalks clear in the winter. And I do want to take one more because I just saw this pop up, and it was somebody that did ask this in the last form as well. The question was about air conditioners and fans in our different classrooms. Right now, we have received no prohibition from any of the guidance we've looked at that says air conditioners and fans cannot be used in classrooms. However, we want to look at that a little further and just make sure before we give a final decision that yes, they can be used, no, they can't be used, to look into what that might specifically mean. With that said, we have gotten a letter from our engineers. Our engineers and our architects have a long-standing relationship with the district regarding our HVAC systems. They've given us written confirmation that all of the HVAC systems in the district are fully up to code and meet all the requirements that the State Education Department and the Department of Health have indicated for schools opening up. With that said, we have the ability to improve on some of those aspects by bringing in more outside air. They have the capacity to bring it up to 100% outside air in the way our systems work. Normally, there's a trade-off in that, especially in the colder weather. The more outside air you bring in, the more you have to heat that air in order to bring it up to room temperature. It's more costly from an energy perspective, but certainly in these times, that's something we are going to absolutely consider doing more of. There are different ways overnight to continue to bring in fresh air to the school buildings and items like that. So we are planning on following every recommendation that our engineers have indicated would be applicable for us to increase the ventilation associated with our current HVAC systems. But we have looked at it and we've gotten confirmation from them that we are fully up to code with what the Department of Health and the State Education Department are requiring with the HVAC systems in our schools. So with that, I'm not sure who's next.
We'll go back around this way. A couple other questions in following up on the transportation. We have we recognize that with the increased number of parents that will be dropping off, it's going to be necessary for us to revamp our drop-off procedures. Those are kind of in that next level down, or maybe even one more level down of decisions that need to be made. But we will expect. We will have less students coming in the middle and high school every day in person, but we'll have more of them probably driving or being dropped off. So we'll be changing those procedures, and certainly at the elementary buildings, we'll be looking at some changes in the drop-off procedures to accommodate the larger numbers. One of the trade-offs for this, though, with parents helping with providing transportation during the crisis, is that we should be able to accommodate getting our kids to school with one bus run. We have some neighboring districts who are in a situation where they need to do multiple runs, where they have to go out and bring their elementary, maybe kids in one wave, and then go back out and get a second wave in order to maintain those spaces on the bus. So this will help us to do that, even though I'm sure it'll be somewhat inconvenient, but we appreciate that, and hopefully that'll help us have more instructional time. A couple of questions that came in about school activities. One was about VOTEC, and is VOTEC still going to be held by all accounts? Our understanding is that the VOTEC program will run. The hands-on portion will be held in person in a socially distant manner, in a careful manner, and the BOCES will run the integrated activity, the integrated classroom portions on virtually. So it'll be a hybrid model, but it will run. After school activities, a lot of those things are on pause at this point. We'll have more information as we get into the school year of when we can start up after school activities, but at this point we will not be having a live in person after school late bus run or after school period. All athletics have been suspended until at least October 1st, so there won't be practices or anything after school in the first month of school. And another thing is that I meant to mention earlier is that the buildings will be closed to activities at 6 o'clock. So there'll be nothing in the buildings after 6 o'clock, so that we can really focus the time on cleaning the buildings and getting them ready for the next day. And again, all this is subject to change as time goes on and as we get new guidance, but that's how we'll be starting off the year. There's a bunch of questions about music and the music program and how we'll be handling band and orchestra and chorus. Again, those are things at the next level down, but they definitely are in discussion, and there's a lot of great ideas that have been coming up within the Fine Arts Department for how to do these things in a way that we can be safe and students can still learn and move forward in those areas that they have interests and passions in. So the music information will be coming out shortly, but I can assure you that it's being discussed and lots of different options are being looked at.
Okay, continuing on with some of the hybrid type questions. There's a question that if I were interested in in-person elementary, but not every day, if I wanted to come every other day, would that be an option? Currently, under the models that we have, our 1 through 5 instruction is an everyday instruction program. So, choosing a hybrid of the hybrid is not an option currently in our plan. There are several questions in here about other models that could be under consideration for the way to do the middle school and high school schedules. Our principals at the middle school and high school work in conjunction with their building councils and are ultimately trying to identify the schedules that work best based on the framework that was presented, and that's why we landed on the basic framework that we had for continuity of instruction. For parents choosing the in-person, we're trying to ultimately have the greatest amount of in-person contact that we can have, and ultimately be socially distant and still have our kids be in the school. So we tried to identify a schedule that would give as much in-person attention with teachers as possible, and then have to be virtually as little as possible. And then obviously when we're in the virtual school, you have an option of being virtual, and then that gives you 100% option of not being in person. So there were a number of interesting scheduling suggestions that certainly will bring back to our principals and building councils so they can take a look at them as they finalize information. Questions about whether virtual school will be adhering to the district calendar. So like if regular school is off, would virtual school be off? Yes, the virtual schools will follow the same overarching district format as the in-person and hybrid programming. And actually to that fact too, again, the schedules will come out in greater detail to parents as they're further developed, but the virtual program will try as much as possible to be aligned to our in-person, because there are certain instances, which goes to a couple other questions, is a teacher fully in-person or fully virtual as far as teaching. Again, at the elementary level, we're going to have a number of teachers who are virtual teachers, and that's what they have a pod of kids across the buildings, and they do a virtual instruction. But we may have certain teachers who are in person in specialty areas who would be also working in the virtual school. At the middle and high school level, as you look at elective courses and different offerings, you may have certain instances where you would have some crossover, again, between the virtual and the in-person for individuals who are teaching. And again, what we have to do is get to that next level and kind of take a look at how it falls out and what the choices are that the individual students who are selecting the virtual option are asking for, and then seeing obviously how that aligns with the teachers and the teacher schedules and the overall framework of the master schedule, so we can put that together in a way that gives the greatest amount of option. But obviously, as mentioned before, there may be some electives that aren't possible in the virtual environment.
Great, thanks, Dave. So I would say the other area that we got a lot of questions on was with respect to screening of people as they were coming into our buildings, and then how is the district going to handle staff and students who exhibit symptoms of COVID-19. So I thought I'd take a few minutes just to talk about what our plan is for screening individuals, and then transition over to how the district will be tackling individuals who exhibit symptoms of COVID-19. So we've been looking for a partner to help us with the screening mechanism. The guidance from the State Education Department requires us on a daily basis to ask 4 questions of all students and all staff. So the 4 questions are: have you experienced any symptoms of COVID-19, including a fever of greater than 100 degrees in the last 14 days? Have you had a personal positive COVID-19 test in the past 14 days? Have you had serious exposure to anybody with COVID-19 in the past 14 days? And have you traveled to any state that is currently on the New York State Department of Health's travel advisory in the last 14 days? If during that screening, if an individual answers yes to any of those questions, they are not to be allowed into school on that day. And so in order to try to make this a little more efficient, we've partnered with a company who's going to develop a Burn Hill specific app for our students and for our families and our staff that every morning they can pre-screen before they get into to the school building and answer those 4 questions. If they answer answer no to all 4 questions, they will get a green check mark indicating that they're good to go to school and then can report to school. If they answer yes to any of them, they'll get a red X indicating that they are not to report to school. The district will also be getting that information at the same time through this app, and so in real time we'll have a sense of individuals who have screened that they're eligible to be in the buildings and those people who are not eligible to be in the buildings. When folks come to the building, they will have to either show on their cell phones that they have screened positively, or if they're on the buses, we'll have lists so that people can cross-reference their screening with the children that are on the buses. And again, nobody would be allowed into the building unless we are confident that they have screened ahead of time and are eligible to enter into the building. In addition, we're also going to make efforts to take temperatures of students as they start to come into the building as an added precautionary measure, whether that's through thermal imaging devices or with actual thermometers. But again, just an extra precautionary level so that we're making sure that the students, as they come into the building, haven't exhibited any additional symptoms from the time the pre-screening took place until the time they get into the building. That information will also be used by us to provide the contact tracing information to the County Department of Health in case we need to let them know who may or may not have been exposed to a potential COVID-19 case in the district. And so we can sort that information by class, by bus, by building, and whatever the County Departments of Health require, we'll be able to provide them with very specific data going back for as long as they need us to, so that we can provide them with the best possible data for their use. The other issue, obviously, is that it's possible that individuals may develop symptoms while they're here at school, whether it be staff or whether it be students. Those individuals will be assessed by the school nurses. We'll have a separate area for any student or staff persons who exhibits COVID-19 symptoms so that they will not be in the same room as an individual who may need to go to the nurse's office for non-COVID related issues. And then the nurse will make a determination at that point whether or not they should be sent home. If they are determined to be sent home, staff members will be asked to leave immediately, and students will remain in an isolated area away from the rest of the student population until their parents could come and pick them up. The State Education Department guidance is very clear then. Once folks are not eligible to be in the buildings because of symptoms, whether it is because they've screened that they weren't eligible before they got here, or we sent them home after they got here, they have to go and get clearance one of 2 ways. So the first way would be to go to see a medical professional, get assessed by the medical professional, and then be released by that medical professional. What the guidance speaks to is if the medical professional can attest that the symptoms aren't COVID-19 related and that the individual symptoms improve over the course of the next 24 hours, then with the medical professional's release, they can come back into the building. If the medical professional determines that they have COVID-19, or if the person does not go seek a medical professional's opinion, then they are treated as the same as a positive test would be that we talked about earlier. So again, they would have to be out for at least 10 days. They'd have to be symptom-free for at least 3 days after they'd stopped using any type of medication, and they'd have to see a significant improvement in those kind of other symptoms, cough, shortness of breath that may be associated with COVID-19. So as we have people who are screened out of the district's buildings, we'll be in contact with our school nurses. They'll be helping to track to make sure that both students and staff provide the appropriate clearance so that they can return into the building and make sure that these folks who exhibit symptoms are hopefully assessed by medical professionals and then we're relying on the medical professionals to release them back once that the doctors or the physician's assistants feel as though either the symptoms have relieved themselves, or that the symptoms were indicative of another underlying condition that aren't related to COVID-19. So we're going to do our best to make sure that anybody who isn't screened is seeing medical professionals, and then we'll rely on those medical professionals to give us the documentation that students and staff are available to come back in to the school buildings. So in terms of how we're going to screen and deal with symptoms, those are kind of processes we're planning on for the start of the school year.
I'll take a couple here on special education services. There's a number of questions about how will we provide those services, and will they be, maybe a number of questions about how will we provide them, and will we be filling the IEP? Of course, yes, definitely. As soon as we have the numbers, again, and for people who need to tune out or aren't sticking with us till the end, we're going to send these forms out again on August 3rd to all of our parent emails. We're going to ask all parents to submit one for each child back to your building principal. We'll just submit the form. It'll come to your building. We'll start to compile this information. You can feel free to contact your child's principal at any time during this decision period. We're also going to have a very active, frequently asked questions document that's going to be responsive to the questions that are coming in. That'll be updated on a regular basis and posted on the front page of our website. As you're making this decision, you can read through those questions, and it's kind of divided into questions about virtual school, questions about in-person school, to help you make that decision. So to answer the question about the IEPs, once the principals know and the special services department knows what students with IEPs are in remote and what students with IEPs are in person, they'll be able to arrange their resources in order to meet those IEP needs. So definitely we're committed to that. Also questions about maybe in the spring a student with special needs had some difficulty. Those are things we want to know. As I said earlier, we'll work hard to change the way to improve constantly the way virtual learning happens. We think we're going to be able to make a big step forward based on what we learned in the spring, but certainly your feedback, and specifically whoever answered this one or asked this one question specifically about their son just really kind of struggling in that virtual learning and not feeling that they were able to benefit from the special education services that they were entitled to. Please let us know, and please contact special services or your child's principal and let them know, and we're working on that. Also, the same thing goes for 504s, that working hard on guidance from our legal counsel on how you fill every aspect of these 504s and the IEPs when you're in this remote setting. Chris?
There you go. Okay. Okay, a few more questions that came in. One question was on recess in the morning and how that would be handled. One of the things we're looking into now is if it's going to be possible for us to do any type of deep cleaning or disinfecting of our playground equipment according to the guidance that's been issued. Right now, we don't know if that's going to be possible given our current schedules, but one of the things our elementary principals have been working really hard on, and they've been great at it in partnership with some of the physical education teachers and other staff, is to design activities outside that may not be using the playgrounds, but will also allow great, meaningful recreational activities for the kids outside. So we do plan on having the kids outside when weather permits, and there are activities being designed for them where they wouldn't necessarily be in contact or touching things that they shouldn't be touching and then sharing without the proper disinfecting protocols being followed. There was a question on the budget and what have we budgeted for. There was a small provision for risk in the budget. We build that in every year for things that we may not know completely at the time that the budget's adopted. We are allocating a significant portion of that provision of risk towards meeting some of these challenges that COVID-19 is placing. However, that is going to be limited. We are still under the specter of the governor cutting our state aid by 20%, which he has threatened to do and has not given us definitive guidance on whether or not that's going to happen. We're also eagerly awaiting what might happen at the federal level that might offset some of those cuts or may provide us with more funding that can help us through this situation. But right now, we are doing what we can. If what it takes to reopen ends up exceeding the provision for us that we have in the budget without any additional help from the state or the federal government, there will likely have to be cuts or reductions in other areas in order to make up for the amounts we're going to need to expend in order to open up properly. We don't know exactly what those cuts are gonna be yet, but there would have to be committed to doing it if we ended up in that situation. We're hopeful that will not be the case, but we are prepared for that if that eventuality does occur. Another question on water fountains. According to the guidance, the only water fountains that will allow to be used will be the ones that have bottle fillers. Students may not put their mouths up to the drinking fountains under this guidance. Those drinking fountains that have the mouthpieces will be taped off. Students may still fill bottles in the drinking fountains. They'd be encouraged to bring bottles with them to school in order to meet that requirement. And we're also making sure that there are enough bottle fillers in every one of our school buildings to accommodate the needs that students have. The Director of Facilities has already ordered more, and they're in the process of installing those bottle filling drinking fountains throughout the district school buildings. As far as discipline on the bus with masks, right now, drivers and monitors would manage the requirements of students to wear a mask the same way they'd manage any other behavioral activity enforcement that would need to occur on the bus. We do believe that this should become pretty routine for most of our students. After a certain period of time, wearing the mask should hopefully become a habit. They'll ride it for the extent of the bus ride, and then they follow the established procedures in the school building once they enter the school building after that. Transportation, there was a question about did SED give guidance for no more than 12 people per school bus. I have not seen any guidance yet or any regulations that said there should be no more than 12 students per school bus. We'll continue to look and see if there was an update to that effect. In the NYSED guidance that was put out, there was talks of masks at all times when students are on the school buses, and then socially, there was a clarification that came out later that said socially distance when possible and practical, which is what we're trying to attempt to do with that 22, no more than 22 per bus, one student per seat, with masks on unless they're with their siblings. One of the things that we did try to look into was something called sneeze guards, which are just clear plastic, kind of loose clear plastic that could have been installed behind seats and around the driver's seats. We were looking into doing that, and we actually had a vendor that was willing to sell them to us. We tried to research all the options available. We then contacted the Department of Transportation, and despite NYSED's guidance, the New York State Education Department says we should look into doing this. The Department of Transportation said that if we were to install these on any of our buses, they would red tag our buses or pull them off the road and would not allow them to be used for student transport. So at this point in time, without any further guidance from the Department of Transportation, we will not be able to install sneeze guards on the buses. One of the things that we're a little concerned about is that even if they were to be made available, there's a 3-week lead time that the vendor indicated that it would take to get them in stock and get them to us, and then we estimate about a week or a week and a half for our mechanics to put them in. So we're already almost beyond that window of time where we could get that done before school started. So we're very hopeful we may get more guidance from the Department of Transportation, but there's no assurance that would occur. On school buses, one of the things that we will say is we are still encouraging all our students to bring reusable cloth masks from home every day to use. However, if a student does forget that when they're looking to board the bus at the bus stop, our drivers will be issued boxes of disposable masks that they can hand to a student to put on before they board the bus. The guidance from both the Department of Health and State Education Department have been pretty clear about mask wearing on the buses. If a student does not wear a mask, we will not allow them to board the bus unless, which was another question, medical exemptions, unless there's a doctor's note that has a student medically exempt from wearing a mask, in which case we're going to do our best on the school buses to implement more socially distant protocols or procedures, possibly even hoping that student could be routed on a bus perhaps with fewer students so that we can keep them more socially distant, or all the students on that bus more socially distant than they otherwise would be. Trying to get through a few more of these. We do know that parent traffic, the car traffic in our buildings in the morning is going to increase under this method. So we are trying to make accommodations at our buildings to try to avoid traffic backups. But the start and end times of when instruction begins in school may actually be changed. And we're actually looking at the potential of having drop-off windows for parents. We haven't finalized that yet, that's still coming down the road, but it might possibly, certain groups of parents will be assigned at different 10 or 15-minute intervals where we would respectfully request that be the time where they were able to drop their children off at school in order to do our best to prevent any type of congestion or traffic flows during that time. Again, still more fully developing that, and we'll get more clarification on that once we have parents fill out on August 10th and we know exactly how many parents are planning on driving versus having students take the bus. Arrival window. There might be some changes to the afternoon dismissal procedures. We may need more time to get students on the bus. There was a question about half-day kindergarten. One of the things, we've done some analysis on half-day kindergarten, is we looked at what the cost would be for transportation, and at our best early estimates on that, in order to offer all those midday bus runs, which would have to go throughout the entire district, as our kindergarten students are spread out across the entire district, the same as the rest of the population, it looks like it might require a 20% increase in the district's overall transportation budget, which translates to about $1 million. So that is something that at this point is very cost prohibitive for us. We can continue to look into that, but it's just a very, very expensive option, and we're just not sure if that's something that's possible to implement. There are travel restrictions that New York State has put in place. There was a question about travel restrictions. There are states that people are required to quarantine from if they come back from New York State. The screening tool that we're going to be asking parents to fill out will have that as a question. It will ask you to certify, have you traveled to a state that has been prohibited by the governor for traveling to without quarantining within the past 14 days. You have to check the box no, or else you will not pass that screening tool. So it's something we will be asking every day. Have you followed those procedures, making sure that you're certifying to the district, to your neighbors, to everybody, that you've complied with that before you're sending your child to school afterwards. One change that we are asking for a board policy change is there's a couple different things we are doing with transportation regarding stops. We are asking and we're requiring through board policy that a student have one location that they're picked up at the morning, one in the afternoon. We've generally been very generous with allowing different stop changes. We've allowed bus passes. We've allowed multiple locations for students to be picked up and dropped off. There's a couple different reasons. If in the unfortunate event we do have a situation where we do have a child test positive for COVID-19, this will allow us to do the contact tracing, well not us, the Department of Health do the contact tracing if a student has only been on one bus as opposed to them being on multiple different school buses at a given time. In addition, we know that our dismissal processes and procedures are going to become much more complex in the afternoon, in particular at our elementary schools. And one of the things that's very difficult for those schools is to try to find out what student is going on what bus in a particular day and what students may have a bus pass to change their bus. Safety is always our highest priority when we're talking about students, and we always want to make sure our students get on the right bus and they're dropped off at the right place. With the additional complexities that COVID-19 brings, it's much easier and it's more efficient for our school buildings to say this is the same bus the child will be on every day, to make sure we can keep them socially distant in the gymnasiums when we line them up, and to keep a consistent flow to get those students out in a much more simple, easier process to avoid additional complexity. There was a question about students needing a cell phone to show that certification. Students do not need a cell phone to show that certification. If parents are dropping them off, it's an easier way for the parents to show that they have that done. We're working on other methods where folks in the different school buildings will have that, and they'll be able to follow up with the different students to make sure that their parents have completed that certification, or will be calling the parents in the morning when they arrive at school if for any reason they haven't completed that certification, asking them to complete that as the students in school. But as we indicated, we're going to try to do kind of a double protocol where we're going to ask the parents to do that certification every morning. It's going to be a requirement, it's not an ask. In addition, we are going to want to take the temperature of every student that arrives at school, regardless of whether or not that certification was completed. We are trying to put those procedures in place right now, and we're working really hard to be able to have that double check as students enter our school buildings every morning. Question about kindergarten and no questions on the bus. That probably will happen in the registration form that will happen by August 10th. Whatever kindergarten program the district offers, transportation will be available to parents that request it for kindergarten. It's the same thing we asked of all the rest of our parents to the greatest extent possible. If you can drive your child to school this year, it allows us, for those that don't, to be able to work on a socially distant plan for our school buses to the greatest extent possible. And I think I talked about a doctor's note for a student who could exempt them from wearing a mask. We would try to put on different protocols and procedures on the bus to allow for greater social distancing in those circumstances wherever possible. So, move to next.
Me. So there's a number of questions in the kindergarten section that came in about kindergarten, a couple that came in before the forum, and then a couple that came in since we talked about what our plans currently are for kindergarten. So a couple of the questions are related to the services that a kindergartner receives currently, speech services, potentially PT following the IEP. so we will have the option to provide those services for a student. If it's 3 times a week, they'll be provided 3 times a week. So as we look at this, this every other day model, that is a temporary model, and a couple people are frustrated with that. I understand that, and isn't, and we are too. I mean, we want our kindergartners here full day every day. As we get numbers in from the registration forms that are due in on the 10th, we'll have an idea of maybe which way this is shifting, and we'll have an idea of exactly how many pods we'll need in the buildings. It's possible that we can offer some that are more often, a section or 2 that are more often, maybe more. It's possible that we could shift because some of our buildings have more space than others do. So we haven't ruled out anything. We kind of wanted to say, the one message we wanted to give our kindergarten parents is, the idea of delaying it is off the table now. We are going to start kindergarten, and we know that people want to start full day every day. And we are aiming towards that as soon as we can in the year. It's not going to be a final decision, this is the way it is. So we wanted to let parents know that they should at least count on every other day and coming back for kindergarten, that the delay was off the table. But I also recognize that there's childcare issues involved for people, and they need to know soon. That's why we want to ask them to plan for the every other day. Although, and I do know that there's a number of private kindergarten programs through the Y and a couple of other local child care providers and nursery schools we would be more than happy to work with them to try to provide those kind of options. But again, we really want them to be here full time every day, and as we look at this fluid situation, we'll do our best to get to that point as soon as we possibly can. As I said, there are some options looking at potentially moving 5th grade. That's a very, very big decision to make as well, to have 5th graders come to the high school or the middle school to occupy some spaces that we would need to create. There's other questions here about, well, would they use separate entrances and separate bathrooms? And of course, we have to take all that into consideration and do that, but that's not an easy thing to figure out if we can do the way buildings are set up. So, and busing related to those things as well. So that is still open, and we're still looking at those things. So I understand people's frustration in that area. Chris talked about the morning and afternoon. That would be another way to solve it if it wasn't so costly to run so many buses at a time when we see a lot of emergency expenditures that we're going to be forced into basically for everything that we've talked about so far today. So I think that covers the kindergarten class questions, and turn it over to Dave. We're getting close to the end here.
Questions about school supply lists and whether school supply lists will be coming out for virtual and for the in-person. As we get closer, we'll definitely be identifying for individuals the things that you need to be successful in both of those environments. So we will get that information out to parents so that you can best plan for those. Lots of questions, again, all over the place in regards to what specific electives, very specific questions related to accelerated courses, PACE courses at the middle school and high school, as to whether those will be offered 100% in the virtual programming. Again, the intent for virtual programming is to be aligned as much as it can possibly be to the regular program. We do, again, have to ultimately see where the enrollment comes out in those particular areas to be sure about what electives can be offered, whether acceleration can be offered. Obviously, again, we want to offer the greatest amount of complementary instruction between the virtual and in-person environments. So it is our hope, but there again is no guarantee for any specific singleton or any specific elective. At the high school, all graduation requirements will be offered in the virtual program, and every effort will be made to have as much option as can be available for students in the virtual environment. There's questions about how virtual students will interact with one another. Again, there's going to be a number of strategies to have the students interacting with each other in the virtual environment. That's a big piece of, again, the professional development to try to identify ways for students to engage with one another. Obviously, they wouldn't be doing that in person, but be doing that through their curriculum. And there's questions whether students in the virtual school will be able to take part in certain activities at the high school. Again, we're looking at the extracurriculars. Again, athletics are on hold for the time being, but we're certainly looking at the opportunity for students in that modality to be able to have access when appropriate to activities at the school. Textbooks and workbooks, how will students in the virtual program be able to gain access to physical materials that they need? Very similar to how we did this past spring, we had a number of different ways to collect materials, and we would have those again, ability for parents to come and pick things up. We are working in both environments to be as paperless as we can be for obvious reasons. So as we work through that, we will make sure students have their appropriate materials, but a lot of those materials will be online in the virtual environment. What's the role of parents in the virtual school environment, particularly at the middle school and high school? Again, we have expectations that parents partner with us in education, in logical ways. I think obviously, depending upon age, as you move through in a virtual school, there is an expectation, that parents are partnering, more in instances where kids are younger and need some of that extra help. But the goal of the virtual program is to have it be as student directed and as teacher-student interactive as we can be throughout the day. Contrasting that, obviously, though, there's questions about the screen time and the appropriateness of the amount of screen time in the virtual environment. That's going to be a big focus of our discussions as we develop. Again, we're keeping the schedules aligned because they have to be aligned in order for instructional delivery. So you can expect that the kids will be working in the virtual world, in the same fashion as they're working in the in-person world, but exactly how that looks is different, just like depending upon, the teacher that your child has at school, even in a regular situation, the exact way that instruction is delivered will not be the same. So just because you're in a virtual high school class and that class is scheduled for 80 minutes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're on live for 80 minutes. There's multiple different ways that ultimately that can be employed, but we have regular contact time, regular attendance to ensure that students are getting a commensurate education, whether they're in both places. And that's another question, a lot of what exactly will my instruction look like in the secondary hybrid environment. Again, Dr. McGrath mentioned there's a couple of different ways on the outset that we can look at that. There's the opportunity for classes to be streamed to the home. There is the opportunity for flipped classroom, where you would have situations where there would be information that was captured prior, and then that information will be talked about on the days with in-person. And there's multiple other ways that we're looking at through professional development. Again, in-person, before COVID, it's highly varied. We differentiate instruction ultimately to try to reach the greatest amount of learners, and that matches with the faculty members' learning style. Same thing is going to happen in the hybrid and in the virtual environment. You're going to see a mixed modality of different ways of delivering that instruction. Some courses will lend themselves better to certain ways. Some courses will lend themselves better in other ways. The key is that however the instruction is delivered on the basic schedule. Students are on and interacting with information during that time, and then ultimately, interacting with their teachers based on how that particular format is set up. There's a question about the elementary school as far as how the instruction will look like with kids in different pods. Again, very similarly to the way we talked at the secondary level, how that instruction is exactly delivered will be different. But again, students will be given primary instruction, and then there will also be times, very likely, that students will be working on, independent work or working on extension activities based on the primary instruction that they got from their primary teacher. Specials, again, will be delivered during that time, and maybe in person, maybe virtually, and those students will be moving through their scheduled day. Right now at the middle school and high school, although like Dr. Abdu said, We have a lot to deal with as far as dismissal and arrival, but right now the middle school and high school for the most part are going to be operating on the schedule that we're used to as far as the beginning and end, although that may have to be modified depending upon things as we see. The elementary schedule for students will likely be condensed due to the fact that, again, the drop-off and the dismissal times will be certainly impact the instructional day. The amount of time that it's going to take us to screen the students, get them in safely, and get them out safely. A number of questions about will sample schedules be provided in the coming days, to get a sense of what a virtual or an in-person would look like. Yes, we want to get out examples to help you make the best choice that you can make. By August 10th, we have that deadline there ultimately so that we can make sure we can program appropriately and get schedules done and do all of the logistical things that need to be done in order to have school ready. So we'll be providing you with additional information as the curriculum teams and building councils develop some of the additional specifics beyond what we're able to give you directly tonight. So we'll get that information out, and the frequently asked questions document will be available to get to some of the more specific questions. Principals will be holding meetings moving forward. You'll get invitations to that. So in some instances, as we move forward and move beyond where we have more information, you'll be able to get more specifics on your particular questions through that format as well. I think that's good for right now, Mark.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So I thought I'd take a second. There are a number of questions related to face coverings and masks and face shields. And so I know, as Dr. McGrath has indicated before, we are going to rely on the guidance that's been given to us by the State Education Department and the Department of Health as it relates to masks and face shields. So I thought I'd take a few seconds just to go over what those specific regulations are so that the community knows what we are planning. So we are obligated to provide cloth face coverings to every student and staff member that would like one. Obviously, both students and staff are able to bring their own masks or cloth face coverings in, but we will have a generous supply. Dr. Abdu has already ordered boxes and boxes of masks for our community here at the district. So we will have them available to anybody who would like one or who needs one. Face shields have been determined by the State Education Department to be supplemental, not as a replacement. So we do have face shields that are available for students and for staffs who would like to wear it in addition to the mask that they're required to, but it can't replace the masks for either students or for staff. And the guidance is very clear that masks need to be worn at any time that people are within 6 feet of each other, when they're in the hallways, when they're in the bathrooms, or when they're in congregate settings such as buses like Dr. Abdu talked about earlier. We will take this requirement very, very seriously. Staff or students who are not abiding by that guideline to have the mask on when they're within 6 feet of others will be addressed either by the building principal or by the district office. And so we are, again, bound to make sure that we are ensuring that when people are close together, within 6 feet of each other, that they have their masks on to keep everybody safe. When they're in the instructional environment, those rules apply as well. And so if a teacher or if students need to be moving about the classroom, students and teachers will have to have the masks on during that time. If there were times during the instruction period where everybody was socially distanced, teachers, students, then it would be permissible for the students or the teacher to take the mask off so that they could do the lesson or they could work quietly at their desk. But again, if there was a need for either a teacher or a student to encroach upon that 6 foot social distancing, the entire group would need to mask up for safety based on the Department of Health guidance that is out there. Regardless, they have to provide for breaks of the mask use. The guidance is very clear that the schools and teachers and principals need to work in breaks for kids, especially those younger kids, so that they have time with their masks off. That is something that we're going to ask our building councils to talk about, to make sure that they are able to come up with schedules so that all the kids throughout the day get some breaks from the masks, as a way to just get a little bit of relief. But again, our goal is to adhere to that guidance that's been given to us. We take it very seriously, and so anytime people are within 6 feet of each other, anytime that they're going to be in a congregate setting, the requirement is that they have to have masks on. If they can remain socially distanced during instruction, then it would be permissible for folks to take their masks off. And obviously we'll work at the building level to ensure that there are breaks for masks use throughout the day. The other thing I thought I should touch on, there were some questions about COVID-19 testing by the school district or COVID-19 testing as a screening mechanism for members of the community. The guidance is very clear that they do not empower school districts to do testing on their own. They want testing to be done by medical professionals, either by doctors' offices or county health departments. And so, unlike other professions that have kind of been given the directive by the state to get biweekly testing, there is no such requirement for teachers or for students, and we aren't permitted to even implement that under the guidance that's been given to us by the state education department. So the testing really, in terms of COVID testing, will be done on a case-by-case basis as staff or students exhibit symptoms and go to healthcare professionals, and then if the healthcare professional decides that a test is appropriate, that obviously would be given by those healthcare professionals, and then the results would be provided to the district either through clearance and a negative test or notification of the positive test. So I hope that gives a little bit of clarity on the issue of masks and face shields, and then just some follow-up on the COVID-19 guidance as it relates to testing of staff and students by the Department of Health and State Education Department.
Getting pretty close.
Getting close. There's a question about a model whereby an elementary hybrid could do an in-person hybrid, so they would be in school a couple times a week and then would be home a couple times a week, much like the secondary. That's not something that we have in the plan at this point. The educate or the virtual option, of course, and then the in-person option every day won't be being in a way that the teacher who's in person will be able to provide a remote experience. If a student were to become sick for a lengthy period of time and were to need to be out, we could definitely talk about those as extenuating circumstances to transfer over into the virtual school. That's certainly an option. There's also a question here I don't think was answered about the technology platforms and some of the things related to tools across the different levels. Definitely great feedback and things that our teachers recognize and realize and want to streamline a set of tools that are so that the experience for parents is similar whether you're working virtually with an elementary student or with a secondary student. So those are important. And I think also just a couple of general questions about the quality of virtual and of course you need to make a decision in 10 or 12 days. And so you want to know, if I opt for the virtual, what am I opting for? And I guess what we're saying is, as I said earlier in the presentation, we've learned a lot. We are committed to making that virtual experience very comparable to the experience both in pacing and in connection with the teachers and in direction by the teachers, not the parent, for the learning, the availability of resources, availability of different types of courses and specials. So we're trying hard to make that virtual option something that will be very comparable to the in-person experience, minus the masks, I guess, would be a different approach. So there's a number of questions about that. We want to make sure that we emphasize that. And also, if you want to talk specifically about it, please feel free to reach out to your building principal between now and the time you make that decision, or send them an email or give them a call at the office, and they can answer those questions for you. Chris?
Is it to me? All right. The next question, I want to say thank you very much for this question. It really is appreciated. It means a lot. The question was, how can parents help? And thank you very much for offering that. I can tell you a couple different ways right now. Number one, substitutes are always in great need. If your schedule permits, and if you're able to be a substitute teacher assistant, a substitute cleaner, a substitute cafeteria worker, substitute bus monitor, substitute teacher, anything along those lines, we would be absolutely grateful if you would work with our Human Resources Department, get on our substitute list and be available when we needed you to come in. There may be a situation where you may be in quite often in that role, and we would absolutely appreciate that help, possibly taking temperatures, possibly doing any of the work that a lot of these folks are being asked to do this year. So we would really, really appreciate that if you would be willing to be a substitute. Please consider that. One other item that I would appreciate it if parents, in conjunction with the different PTA buildings at the elementary levels, we were talking a lot about that walking school bus and how to put it together. I would appreciate it if someone could take the lead with each of your individual building PTAs, be a liaison with me. I would be happy to work with one person from each elementary school to help put that together. It would just be simply a matter of if you could reach out through your PTAs to parents that might be interested in this, find out where they live, find out who we could put together, identify some volunteer parents that may be able to walk with students, or we could even have some of our staff members possibly assigned to that, have a crossing guard where appropriate. And again, we're fully aware that there are many neighborhoods. Where I live in the Burn Hills district, a walking school bus is not feasible for me. I'm in the very northern part of the district. For some other neighborhoods in the district, a walking school bus is absolutely feasible, as there's many neighborhoods very close to some of our elementary schools. So if parents, if you're willing to substitute, if you know anybody that's willing to substitute, and parents that are involved with your PTAs, if you're willing to work with me and be that liaison, please send me an email, cabdu@bhbl.org. My contact information's all over the website. I'd be thrilled to work with you to see if we could make that happen. A couple other questions. They talk about what costs have we had so far. The costs are mounted. To this date, for the personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, disinfecting supplies, in excess of what we normally buy, we're up to about $200,000 so far, including some of the barriers we're trying to buy for the classrooms. That's mounting. One of the things we as a district are doing, though, is we are keeping a very hyper-accurate, we're always accurate with our records, but in this case, a hyper-accurate record of every penny we've spent on these items, because we are hopeful that there will be a federal, less likely a state, but perhaps a federal source where we can submit for reimbursement for these COVID-19 related expenses. We're very hopeful that that could occur, because we know we're going to be needing to spend more than that as time goes on in order to properly open in the manner that the Department of Health and the State Education Department are asking us to open for schools. So we're working on that. Some questions on school lunch. The guidance has indicated that any student that wants a meal from school will get one even on the days that you may not be attending in person. So for free and reduced price lunch students, we will put together a mechanism for doing that. Right now, it looks like students that might be at the secondary level might be not on a consistent schedule. If it's every other day, if it's 2 days on, 2 days off, whatever that ultimately is, we're looking to make sure we send home students with those meals, free and reduced price lunch students with those meals on the days that they're not here. For students that are not free and reduced price lunch, that would simply like to buy school lunches, I love that idea. That's great. We'd be more than happy to send you with a paid school lunch home at any point in time, or breakfast at any point in time we can. As far as procedures, we have not fully identified the procedures that we're going to use with students going through the lunch lines yet, or if they're going to go through the lunch lines. We're trying to make sure we meet the protocols for disinfecting and cleaning, and what that would mean is that every time a student went through the lunch line, we might have to do some disinfecting and cleaning after each one went through. We're looking into whether or not that's practical or feasible. Another option might be that lunches are assembled, an adult comes and picks them up from the cafeteria and delivers them to the students' classrooms at the elementary level. The secondary level may be different. We're still working on that. Question about earlier drop-off time. I think I indicated earlier, YMCA is committed to offering a before-school option. So I believe they begin as early as 6 o'clock if you were looking to sign up for that program. They also have financial assistance packages available for parents that might not be able to meet the cost of the YMCA. Beyond that, there may be, depending on how we stagger these arrival times in the morning, there may be opportunities for students to be dropped off earlier in the care of the district. It doesn't look that it's going to be earlier, it may be later rather than earlier at this point, but we'll absolutely communicate that. But if that happens, the YMCA is a great resource, though, if people need to drop their students off a little earlier. A person mentioned the satellite area to drop off students. I love that idea too. Just something that comes to mind, the Ballston Public Library for students that might attend Stevens Elementary, if there was a way for parents to drop their students off there and then have an adult pick them up and walk them to Stevens on the sidewalks that are available there, that's an option I'd absolutely be willing to consider. Like I said, if I can get some parent liaisons from the different PTAs that might be willing to work with me on that, I'd be happy to try to put that together. Okay. School start date, I think that's going to be largely under the control of the state and the governor as far as when schools will start. I know Massachusetts and Vermont recently indicated some modifications to when their school years would be starting. I believe that's something that's going to be tightly under control. Not just the state, the governor will decide when schools will be able to begin session. As far as school bus students, we talked about, there was some concern about students that were not required to wear a mask on the school bus because of medical needs. The first thing we have to say to everybody, and there was another question on here as well, the guidance is absolutely crystal clear on that. If there's a medical reason why a student cannot wear a mask, the school district may not require them to wear a mask on a school bus. So with a doctor's note, if a student brings in that doctor's note that says they cannot medically tolerate a face mask, we do have to allow them to ride the bus. Our preferred option, as we indicated, was to put those students in areas, well, multiple areas. It wouldn't just be those students, have multiple areas with sneeze guards on them so that we can have those students in an area that might help with that isolation of any type of symptoms that might occur with that. But again, we're still hopeful that might be the situation, but we were told we cannot put those on the buses by the Department of Transportation. The other option that the State Education Department guidance indicated is the one we're going to attempt to follow, is to keep those students as socially distant as possible. And again, the more parents that we have that will volunteer to drive their kids to school, to and from school this year, the greater our ability will be to offer more socially distanced options for those students that are on the school buses. There was a question about how can my child learn to speech from a teacher if he's in a speech situation with a teacher wearing a mask. One of the things we are looking into, some of our teachers have brought it up to us, there have been a lot of vendors that have brought this option up to us. In fact, I think I've even seen some of our state and national leaders wearing them, is there are clear face masks that we believe may meet the guidance, but they're clear so students can still see the mouth movements of the individual wearing the mask. We're looking into those to make sure they meet the guidance for appropriate masks that we're able to use, and we'll look into purchasing those where applicable if that works. There's been some concerns that some of those masks, that some of the less expensive ones you might see on Amazon, might be ones that fog up when you speak, which kind of defies the purpose. But there are some others that may be appropriate for that. So for students in those needs and for teachers in those specific areas where that might be valuable, we are looking for ways to obtain those. And as far as, there was a question about how are we enforcing that students wear masks. I think to start with, one of the things that we want to say, or wear masks correctly, one of the things I want to say before we get to enforcement is there's a teaching component to this. We want to make sure that when we start the school year, we want to teach students this is how to wear a mask appropriately. This is how you can do it. There's videos that show that. Hopefully there'll be some in-person options for that. But beyond that, enforcement, students are going to be required to wear them. I believe it's going to be written into the Code of Conduct as appropriate in accordance with the Department of Health guidance, as Mr. Dixon and Dr. McGrath mentioned earlier. So I think first the answer is we want to teach, we want to instruct, we want to help. That's what we do. We're a teaching and learning institution. Beyond that, we want to continue to encourage students to do that. But as a last resort, there are Code of Conduct implications for students that don't wear a mask in accordance with the guidelines that are established. And I think that's all mine.
So lightning round questions, a couple of quick ones. Will there ever be such a thing as a snow day again? I'll hold off on my answer to that question, but I think a lot of things are going to be different when this whole thing is over. What level at which the school would need to be shut for regional or even local positive testing, all of that would be guided by either the Department of Health or by the governor's office in the case of the state. And there is a threshold, if you look at the dashboard that's there, that we look at every day, that there is a threshold that the governor has indicated at which point he would move a region into fully remote. The beauty of this system is that we honestly, have we're putting a lot of investment in that remote, and I think that we would be ready to make that pivot if that became necessary. And there's also a question about do we work with the teachers and the Teachers Association on these kind of decisions and on this planning. And every time you've heard us mention the building councils, those are our mechanisms by which we work at a building level with our Teachers Association and our parents. We have multiple parents that sit on those building councils as well, and we team plan together. We also at a district level are in close contact with our Teachers Association and work with them. We had a long session with them today right here in this room talking about a lot of the concerns that they have and trying to be responsive to those things and bring all those concerns into the mix for this solution. So yes, definitely work closely together and very appreciative of all the hard work that they're doing even in the summertime here to get us ready to open. You guys have any last questions?
Just a couple. One that piggybacks off of one that Chris was saying is about the start date. Obviously, that's beyond our control, but there is some questions, really good questions about parent education and student orientations. How will that go? We're in discussions about looking at how the first days and first weeks of school will look. Obviously different and for obvious reasons, but also for reasons of ultimately trying to orient students to the particular modality that they're in. We're also working on providing opportunities for parents to be able to kind of get professional development of their own right on the platforms that we're using, working hard to connect you and your students so that you're kind of on the same page, particularly if you're in the virtual environment, but also in the hybrid environment so that everyone's kind of talking the same language in regards to the technological knowledge that it takes to work in these new environments. So the first days of school, while the start day may be controlled, it definitely may be a kind of a slow phase into how we begin instruction. There's a question about elementary PACE programming right now. Based on the way that things are framed out, we wouldn't be offering at the onset elementary PACE offerings. So that would be something that we'd be looking at as the year progresses, but that's something that currently in that framework isn't going to be available right at the onset. Currently, there's questions about students needing extra help after school. That's something that we have to talk about. We're definitely going to be thinking about ways to provide students extra support. Again, those are things that generally roll in even in the normal school year, but we may have to take a look at that as we are through the lens of all other things that are happening after school to balance the needs of instruction and then obviously getting the buildings ready for the next day and all of the things that we have to do through that lens. And then also what about particular areas where students get AIS or RTI? That again is something that we're talking through based on our schedules and based on our delivery model with the individuals in that department and with our principals. Again, the way that we provide those services at the elementary level may have to be redesigned, and then at the middle school and high school level where they're more locked into particular scheduling, it'll probably be more static in the in-person model, and obviously then in the virtual model, that is, as we look at extra help, again, we're going to have to be targeted in the way that we do that. So those are areas that we'll be working on to tailor to individual students as well. So lots of really good questions continue to come in. I will say, Dr. McGrath opened the principals up to taking calls, which they want to do. My office too, email or call if there's specifics on any of the things that we talked about tonight or things that weren't exactly clear. Sometimes it's a little easier in person to identify that, so feel free to call me as well.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up. There have been a couple questions about students who may need to self-quarantine based on either symptoms and the doctor needs the individual to quarantine for a lengthier period of time, or from a Department of Health quarantine, whether or not those students would be able to join into some of the virtual classrooms that are going on. I think that's something that as we fully develop kind of the hybrid option, the in-person option, the virtual option, we do want to hopefully figure ways out that we can blend those students who are either hybrid or in-person to make sure that they don't miss large chunks of school due to being out if they're well enough to learn. So that's something that I know there were quite a few questions on that we have taken note of, that we need to kind of build into our plans for the different models of instruction. So I guess is kind of as wrap up here, that's one of those questions that will be determined, but we appreciate the feedback and the thought as we start looking at those models. And when kids need to be out of school, we don't want them to simply be out without any instruction, and so we have to think about ways that we can integrate that so that there aren't large gaps in their learning based on a quarantine or a period where they need to stay out even though they're feeling well enough to learn. So.
Mike, just a couple questions that I saw throughout here related to symptoms that ultimately turn out to be not anything related to COVID. So what do they do
Right.
when that ear infection,
Yep.
have a fever, the next day it's better?
Sure.
How do they get cleared?
So again, if there are symptoms that wind up being diagnosed by a doctor as not related to COVID-19, ear infection, asthma, as long as they provide a doctor's note that clears them because there are other issues, they can come back to school. Or if the doctor doesn't definitively say that it's due to another condition, but that there isn't a belief that it's COVID related, then they have to they can come back to school after they feel better or symptom free for 24 hours without any use of any type of pain medication or fever reducing medication. So again, our nurses are going to work with parents so that they know that if a child stays at home because of symptoms, they should go see their healthcare provider. They should have the healthcare provider make an assessment, and then if the healthcare provider clears the student to come back because it's an ear infection or it's another symptom that may have it may look like COVID in some circumstances, the healthcare provider has the ability to release the student back to work, and our nurses will help to coordinate that documentation so that we know that the student has been seen by a doctor or a physician's assistant, has been cleared, and is symptom free without the use of medication.
Chris said you had one more?
I have three final things to mention to everyone. During this presentation, I want to give a special thanks to all of my supervisors, the building principals, everybody. They've been great in working with us on this. They've been working flat out to try to get this all put together. In fact, my district supervisor of custodians was texting me during the meeting, and he wanted me to remind everyone that we will have hand sanitizer, we will have soap, we will have sinks, we will have availability for students to wash their hands. We really would prefer that students not bring in their own hand sanitizer or any of those types of products to school during the day. They've been watching the news. Some of those products have been problematic. There's different dyes and different things that could be problematic for other students in a classroom. We will have that available for students, and it is actually flammable as well in many situations, so there's some requirements there from a code perspective and a safety perspective. We'd rather not have students bring in their own hand sanitizing products. So this is, for those of you that are here tonight, that's a reminder, and we'll remind folks again on that. There was another question that talked about if my student needs a mask break outside of the regular time period, and if they're just struggling with it, would they be disciplined for that? And I would honestly say that I don't believe that's the case. The principals can respond to that more fully. If a student is struggling wearing a mask and they're having an issue, we would want to work with that student the same way we would work with any other student that might be struggling with anything else when they're in school. It's not an immediate, you are uncomfortable, you are having a hard time, a panic attack, it's immediately you're going to experience code of conduct discipline for that. I do not believe that's what any of our teachers, any of our administrators, anybody anywhere in this organization would want to see happen. We'd want to work with students and find a way to make them successful to the greatest extent possible. I think I want to make sure that's a clarification. I think one of the earlier questions talked about a student that just outright refused to follow the guidance, not one that might be struggling with adhering to some of the things that they needed to. The last question was about barriers. I think I mentioned this earlier. We are ordering them. We have them coming. The mention was plexiglass. We are not allowed to use plexiglass, which is a struggle. That material is more readily available. We can get it more quickly, and it's less expensive. The state education department has prohibited us from using plexiglass in schools. We can only use polycarbonate. There's some long lead times on that. There's a national shortage, which is why we're trying to get ahead of it and order it as soon as we possibly can. But our intention is to put those barriers up in any location where social distancing is not possible. So if student desks cannot be kept 6 feet apart, it is our intention to make sure we have one of those clear polycarbonate barriers in between the two students. We want to make sure we have those barriers in front of teacher desks wherever possible. And if you can almost imagine a trifold kind of situation where it might be three-sided, that could be placed on a student desk, it could be placed on a student table, could be placed in any different area of the school district, that would help add another physical barrier between individuals to do what we can to help meet the guidance that we've been given. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So there's still a few questions as we go through. There's hundreds and hundreds of questions in here, but hopefully we covered a vast majority of them. One quick thing that I saw that Chris reminded me of is the cafeterias, that the eating in the secondary cafeterias the students will be seated socially distantly. We have a large space in the high school between the upper and lower cafeteria. The middle school cafeteria is large, and remember that'll only be about 35% of the students, and then that's also divided by grade level when they go to lunches. So we'll be able to seat them socially distantly in those cafeterias according to the DOH guidelines. And so again, this is a moment in time. It's where we are right now. The plan will continue. We'll probably leave this and move down the hallway and keep on talking about further developing these plans. We have people working all over the district on this. We'll continue to keep you updated. The best source of information about what's going on is right through our webpage at bhbl.org, and then also directly emailing your principal or us or the special services department for all these different related questions, or transportation, or food services. All of those folks, people can help to answer the different types of questions. So thank you very much. I want to thank also Brandon Olchek and Andrew Wildrick are behind the cameras and things here. They've been here for a couple hours on a nice summer night, helping us out and getting this to go smoothly. So we appreciate it, guys. And thank you everybody for joining us. This will be available if you other people, friends of yours that want to see it online. It'll be available archived online. And again, we look forward to talking to you more in the future. Have a great night.